I'm a managing partner at 321 Apps. So we basically develop mobile applications, and we have some good clients like Reader's Digest, AstraZeneca, and so forth. So today I want to talk to you guys about a couple of best practices when developing Android applications for tablets. So who in this audience are Android developers? Okay, so we have a few developers. Anyone uses Fragments? Okay. So yeah, so basically today one of the main things when anyone is developing for Android tablets is Fragments. So I'm going to basically focus most of this talk about Fragments, and then also I'm going to touch upon how to optimize some UI elements when you're developing for Android tablets. So let's start with talking about Fragments. So Fragments, for those of you guys who already don't know about Fragments, is a concept that was introduced rather recently by Android, and it's a way to actually combine a set of UI elements. So you could have one fragment that had, let's say, like 4 or 5 UI elements, and then you could have another fragment that, let's say, have a bunch of other UI elements. So based on the screen real estate, you can bring in these fragments to get a set of UI elements. So the good thing about this is if you are developing for a tablet which has more screen real estate, then you would want to have more UI elements, obviously, right? And then you would want to bring in more of these fragments to be on the tablet environment. But if you are developing from a smartphone, then you would want to have maybe only one fragment. That gives you less UI elements. So those are fragments. so like I said, so in Android, you always create a new user screen with an activity. So each activity is associated with a screen. So what an activity can do is it can actually use fragments as it wants to have multiple sets of UI elements. So, like I was saying earlier, Fragments was introduced in Android 3.0, which is Honeycomb, and Android 3.0 was the first version of Android that was actually customized for tablets only. And when Honeycomb came out, it was only able to run on tablets. So you couldn't actually run Honeycomb on smartphones. So that was when Google introduced Fragments. But obviously, as you guys know, there are quite a number of Android smartphones that still use versions of Android that are before Honeycomb, right? I think more than half of the phones that access the Google App Store actually have versions of Android before Honeycomb, before Android 3.0. So if you are building an application, and then like I said, fragments are very important if you are dealing with Android tablet applications, and then you want to introduce you want to introduce fragments to application, obviously you want it to run in previous versions of Android also, right? So Google provides what they call compatibility packages that you could install. It's a jar file that you could actually install in an Android application if you want to use fragments and make it also run in earlier versions of Android. So the good thing is you can use fragments, which were introduced recently, but make it compatible with previous versions of Android. So let's look at an example, because I think fragments are key to developing good Android tablet applications. So let's say that we want to develop a news application, and then you have a list of news items, and then when you click on a news item, then you get the details for that particular news item. So a straightforward application. So obviously, if you want it to run well on a tablet environment, you would have the list of news articles, let's say, on the left side, and then when you click on a news article, you'll get the detail about that particular news article on the right side, right? I mean, that's an obvious layout, right? But if you want the same application running on a smartphone, that layout won't make sense. So you would want to have one screen with the list of news articles, and then when you click on that, you go to another screen to get the details, right? So this is a good use case where you would use fragments. So in this particular use case, you would have two fragments. One fragment would contain the list of news articles, and then another fragment would have the detail of a particular news article. So you would have two fragments. And in the tablet environment, you will have both fragments side by side. And in the smartphone, you will have two fragments in two screens, right? So how would you actually do this? So there are several ways that you can actually use fragments in Android. There are actually two ways. So I'm going to talk about the easier way, and I'm just going to give you guys like a very high-level idea of how to do that, how to use fragments in a tablet application. So I was telling you that in this particular use case that we are looking at in a tablet, we are going to have two fragments. But if it is in a smartphone, we are going to have one fragment in one screen, right? So when the application comes up, and it's the same application that's going to be on the tablet and the smartphone, how are we going to have two fragments on the tablet in the same screen and then only one fragment on the smartphone? So one way to do that is to have different layouts. So in the layout that is going to be loaded on the tablet, we'll have the two fragments. So in this particular example, you see the layout at the bottom. I just have a code snippet. And in Android, a layout is a way to actually define the screen, and then you see the two fragments, right? And the way that Android is going to bring out this particular layout with these two fragments in the tablet is the layout is going to be in a folder called layout-large that are associated with large tablet, large screens. So when you load this application into a tablet, it will know that Android will know that it's in a large screen. Then it will look at this layout-large folder and load in the layout, and that layout will have two fragments. So the same application, if it was loaded in a smartphone, Android will look at a folder called layout to get the layout as opposed to layout_large, because now it's in a smaller screen. And this particular layout will have only one fragment. So that's how you would actually get different fragments on the screen based on the size of the screen. So it's pretty straightforward. Basically, in the layout, you define the number of fragments you want, and you put the appropriate layout in the appropriate folder. So now when you have the appropriate screen with the appropriate layouts, since you are dealing with the same application, how would you actually know, how would the activity or the particular class that is dealing with the user interaction know that you have one fragment on the screen in a smartphone or two fragments on a tablet environment? So the way that it would know this is basically when the application would actually see whether there is the detailed layout on that particular screen. And it will actually, I'll show you the code example in the next screen. It will see whether there's the detailed layout, and if the detailed layout is available, then it will know that you are in a tablet environment because you have the summary layout and the detailed layout. But if the detailed layout is not available, then it will know that it's in a smartphone environment. So let's look at the small code fragment that actually does this. So this is a code snippet from the particular activity. Then, as I was telling earlier, activity is associated with the screen in Android, and it has this method called onItemSelected, and that is called when you click on a particular news list item. So the first thing it does is that it tries to get this display fragment. So the display fragment was the fragment that was showing the details. And then it tries to get it, and if it is null, so that means it's in a smartphone because we don't have the display fragment. So if it is null, then what it is going to do is it's going to open a different screen and show the details in a different screen. So it creates an intent. Intent is a way in Android to pass messages, and in this particular situation, it's going to pass a message to create a new activity, which is to create a new screen. And then when it does that, it's also going to send the position of the particular list item that was selected so that it can show the details. And if the display fragment was not null, so that's inside the else clause, then it will know that the display fragment is existing, so it's in a tablet, and you don't have to actually open up a new screen, and it's going to say the display fragment to update it with the content for the details of the list item that was just clicked. So that's basically a quick overview of fragments. Any questions?
The activity has multiple fragments.
Yes.
So if the fragment is on a phone and it's on a different screen and you start it, you want to show that fragment you're doing a stored activity again?
Yes. Yes. So when you start a new activity, it's going to start a new screen. Activity is always associated with a new screen, and in that particular activity, it's going to have a layout that has the fragment.
Okay.
So sorry, go ahead.
So I thought an activity could have two different fragments, one of which would be showing at any time. I was a little confused how we went from the display to the detail.
Right.
We would start the activity again. But I thought two fragments belong to one activity, so why would we start the activity as opposed to just saying, hey, the phone on the screen, bring it up on the screen?
Yes. So we are talking about a tablet and a smartphone at the same time. So in a tablet environment, you would want to have the two fragments. So one for the list on the left side, and
on the smartphone it is not one fragment per
yes,
activity.
yes,
That's why you say it.
right, yeah. So now this same class that you see here is dealing with the use case of a tablet and the smartphone both.
Okay.
So if it is dealing with a tablet, then you have the detail fragment also there, right? Both are there in the same screen. So when it looks at this display fragment, it's not going to be null, right? So when the display fragment is not null, then it's in a tablet, and then it's going to basically display the details in that other fragment. But if it is not there, then you have to start a new activity on a smartphone.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand that it's one-to-one now.
Okay, got it. You had a question.
Yeah, so I'm not an Android developer.
Right.
This doesn't seem very elegant, does it? I mean, the system already knows that there are these two fragments, this UI abstraction. Why do I have to do all those if and else's and pass stuff, pass a class name?
Right. Okay. So I suppose like you are talking about iOS.
No, I'm talking about the fact that I mean, is this the standard way that Google recommends?
Yeah, this is actually code that I got directly from the Google developer website. So this is how they recommend to do it.
But you agree that it's not very elegant?
I mean, it's so define elegance. Like, what do you mean? What's the alternate? What would you want?
I mean, we know stuff like convention over configuration. We have already told the system that this is how it's going to work. So I would have imagined that the framework can figure things out automatically.
Yeah. So the framework figures out to show either the two fragments or the one fragment.
Exactly.
But this is the code that would handle with the backend. So if you think of the UI as the sort of the user interface, this is like the sort of the middleware, the controller, right? So it's dealing with both use cases. So I mean, the alternative would be to have like two classes, right? One that would deal with the tablet environment, and another one that would deal with the smartphone environment, so that you don't have the if then else clause, right? Yeah, I mean it's. Yeah, I mean I'm not sure about like whether it's elegant or not, but this is the way that you do it right now. Yeah. Okay.
I have one follow-up question.
Okay, go ahead.
I will shut up. But if I have a single APK file that I want to run on the tablet and run on the smartphone device,
Right.
essentially I would have to have fragment A, an activity A with a fragment A, and an activity B with a fragment B for the smartphone.
Yes.
But if I have it combined, I'd effectively have an A and an A, a B and a B, and then I'd have to have a C with two fragments for the tablet.
No. So you basically have you'll have one layout for the tablet
Okay.
that will have both the fragments, right? And then you will have two separate layouts for the smartphone,
So
and each of
wouldn't I have to have a separate activity, like
yes.
a separate activity C that maybe has those two fragments inside of it?
Separate activity B. So you'll only need two activities. So one activity would deal with the tablet entirely,
Okay.
and it would also deal with the smartphone with the list. So this is the activity that you're looking at.
So activity A would have the list, and maybe the details.
Right.
If it's in a tablet.
In a tablet, right.
Activity B would only handle the details, and only if you're on a smartphone.
On a smartphone.
Right. Now,
Right.
you can have both of the fragments in that first activity, regardless of whether you're on a smartphone or not, but then you have to manage the back stack yourself to handle the backload.
Right. Okay.
Doing the activities this way gives you that back management automatically.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the easy way to do it. Yeah, and this is
And I'll keep my phone.
no problem. But if you have any more questions, that's fine, because we do have some time. Any other questions? So you have used fragments, so what's your experience?
It's really not that difficult to do.
Right.
It can get tricky if you're rotating the device and switching between one fragment and two fragments.
Right.
Because in this case, display fragment isn't going to be null, it's just not displayed.
Right, right. But if it's in a tablet, I mean, if it's on a smartphone, it's not going to be there, right? So in that case, it's null.
Right.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, the takeaway so far from the presentation is if you want to create good Android tablet applications, I mean, fragments are very important. So keep that in mind. So the next thing I want to talk about is just basically having good UI elements that are customized for a good layout. So if you are building a tablet application, I mean, you would use fragments to get different amounts of UI elements on the screen for a tablet, but still you have different sizes, different sizes of tablet screens, and then different densities of tablet screens, and so forth, right? So even once you have the specific elements that you want on a tablet screen, you still need to make sure that those elements are defined in a way that the Android OS can sort of like customize it based on the exact size of the screen that you're dealing with. So these are a couple of best practices that we need to use, and these apply even if you're building a smartphone application. And so let me go to them. So if you're using a Android layout, right? Layouts are a way that you would actually lay out the widgets in Android. You don't want to specify the exact width or the exact height of the layout. You just want to give hints to the Android OS on the width and the height. And what the Android OS is going to do and at runtime is to make use of the hint that you give, and it's going to come up with the best width and height for the layouts. So if you want width or the height of the layout to take the minimum amount of width or height it needs, you use wrap content. And what it does, it tells Android, I want the width or the height to be minimum as possible. So the Android OS at runtime will take that into account and then give it an appropriate size. If you want it to be take as much space as possible, which is basically to get the the maximum amount of space which is given under the parent, you would use a match parent. and you would never specify the exact amount of pixels. You would rather provide the dimension independent pixels. So screens can have different dimensions, right? So if you say that something is, let's say 5 pixels, then if the screen has a very high density, it's going to be like really small, you can't see it. And if it's a screen with very low density, then it's going to be stretched out wide. So you don't want to do that. You want to use dimension independent pixels. With dimension independent pixels, you basically give Android a hint as opposed to how many pixels you want it, and it will, if it's a high density screen, it will provide it with more pixels, more actual pixels, and the opposite for low density screens. And you should never use absolute layout. This is actually deprecated, but absolute layout is a way that you specify the exact position of widgets in Android. And again, you don't want to do it. You never want to tell Android about exact locations, exact widths, exact heights, and so forth. You want to give it hints. So absolute layout would say exact locations, and you don't want to do it. So you should not use it. And you should always try to use resources. So resources in Android are things like images, icons, which are called drawables, and also layouts, the way that you lay out your widgets in the screen, which are optimized for specific screen characteristics. So screen characteristics are things like the size, then the density, the orientation, and so forth. So you would want to have different, for example, different layouts for different size screens. And it's very easy to do it in Android. So you have basically different folders that you would put different layouts based on the size of the screen. And you would basically have names like layout small, which is the folder that you want to put the layout for small screens, layout large for large screens, then layout extra large for extra large screens, and so forth. And the same thing applies for things like graphics and icons, and these are called drawables. And if you want to have different graphics and icons for different densities, you would basically again put them in different folders. And then you have a folder for medium density artifacts, high density artifacts, extra high density artifacts, and so forth. So those are a couple of other things that we should keep in mind. So the takeaway on this from this talk is basically to use fragments. Just make sure that if you are developing an Android tablet application, use fragments. And when you're developing any Android application in general, make sure that the UI elements are optimized to give Android the flexibility to present it in appropriate size for the specific screen resolution and screen size. Any other questions? Go ahead.
You mentioned the API levels that you can use the support library to use fragments on older devices.
I think it goes up to 2.2 or 2.3.
Yeah, it goes way back. So.
Yeah. So it goes way back. Yeah.
Actually, it goes back to 1.6.
1.6. Okay.
Support library. If you need the grid support, that's actually support library B.7. It's only 2.1 now.
2.1. Yeah. And also there's also there are also action bars. That's another concept that was introduced recently, and that is actually not supported by the support library.
Action bar show up.
Yeah, so you have to use action bar Sherlock for that. Any other questions? Okay, thanks.